Greetings everyone, and welcome back to Pep Organ. Today I'm here at Our Lady of Dolores Church in Chatswood with my friend Ben Adler to announce, as you're probably expecting, the Pep Organ Composition Competition results for 2025. So, this is an interesting year. We had a challenge to write a piece that was simple, as you may recall. It was to be 1 to 3 minutes in length, and to be a piece that you may want to introduce a friend to if they were going to learn the organ. We had the most record number of entries this year, 10, so that was quite an enjoyable experience to adjudicate them all and to hear all of your different works. And it was fantastic to see that there's enthusiasm to compose and to be submitting pieces to Pep Organ. With that said, we have some results as well. But before we get into that, Ben, do you have any particular notes to make about the competition?
Well, I think it's an exciting moment in the competition because Titus radically reduced the scope, is that fair to say, this year? To make it simple, and to make it short. And it was interesting and in various ways exciting also to hear how you, the composers, responded to that brief. And it was great, as Titus mentioned, to have a larger number than before of entries. Some composers interpreted the brief to be simple in quite divergent ways, and we'll discuss that as we, I think, award the place getters.
Absolutely. I think also on this point, every year for the Pep competition will be a little different to the other one, and that's partly because I think if you're given no brief about what to compose, sometimes that can discourage people about they having no idea what to do. By at least having some kind of metric, in this case simplicity, that gave people enough creativity to use their own musical language and their musical ideas to write something, and it could be any genre of music. We really left that open to them. But the idea that we really wanted to hone into was a piece that was on the simple scale. And that's of course not because I don't like complexity. I love complexity, but I also think that there's a real space here, especially in the organ world, in the YouTube world, to introduce people to simple organ pieces that they can take to their church or to their local practice venue and start to learn a piece of new music, completely new. And so again, Pep Organ is here to support that endeavor, where Pep Organ is pretty much non-profit. I mean, a lot of all of the income that we might make from this goes directly into these things like the competitions, which have prizes, and other sort of investments like gear and other little things behind the scenes. So, with all that said, we are awarding 2 highly commended prizes. The first of which we are giving to Joel Paget, who wrote "Solace in Sunshine" for organ. An interesting name, and I think it fits the description quite well of the piece. A beautiful and gentle piece that was really quite interesting. The opening, while perhaps a simple melody, really kind of grew on you as you listened to it, maybe after multiple listenings. The middle section, perhaps not as strong, but it came back at the end quite well, and I think the piece on the whole did resolve itself in quite a satisfactory way.
I actually found that the harmonies in the middle section were my favourite part of that song piece. Yeah. But yes, I agree with Titus that the opening introductory melody, which sort of outlines a triad rising, did take some time to grow on me because it is so simple, which to be fair was the brief. But then the proper melody, the first theme, I found difficult to get my heart invested in. It felt almost too not simple, but simplistic, perhaps, for my personal investment.
There is a distinction there, I think, that we observed a few times, where simplistic, meaning that it may seem undeveloped.
Yeah, or immature, without wishing to be too harsh. But juvenile would be another word, not to describe this melody, but to describe the category of the direction in which some of the other entrants were heading. Simple can be extraordinarily mature or grand. I mean, some of the grandest things are the simplest things.
Indeed.
Like the Great Pyramid.
Yeah.
For example. Yeah, but I thought that there were some wonderful harmonies in the middle when the dynamics grew. So,
And the only other comment to say about this piece, and this will be a theme throughout some of the other pieces as well, is that going on the other spectrum, too complex can often mean, what I mean by that is that it's too hard for a new organist to play. And we had some dynamic markings in this work that would have been difficult for a new organist to know what to do with. So I was also hoping that a simple piece could be carried by melodies and by and the harmonies, and that the organ registrations that go with it are also accessible and not too difficult to set up. With that said, it was still a very good and well-formed piece, and so we are granting it a highly commended. Congratulations. The second highly commended is going to James Tetty, who wrote this piece, Voluntary on Agnus Dei. And it was a tune I recognized immediately because it's the Agnus Dei that commonly gets sung in the Catholic Church. I think Mass 18 is where it's from. A simple melody in itself, but treated in this way with some interesting harmonies throughout. And I rather liked the way that the piece moved along. And there were some very grand moments. There was quite a grand chord towards the end as well. But I think it may have been a little bit on the difficult side for a new organist. There were parts that I had to double check, some accidentals, but also just, I think the overall perhaps maturity needed to play the piece could also be make it a bit too difficult.
Yeah, I enjoyed this piece as well, and I found, similar to Solace, the previous highly commended, that the opening theme was very calming, and that was a very effective interpretation of the simple mandate. I enjoyed the development of harmonic interest in the second section, and especially in the third section. I also enjoyed the use of pedal. I'm not sure if the pedal would have been within a beginner's capacity.
Mostly okay, yeah.
Yeah, well, the very effective use of that, really, in terms of the brief of the first song, we wish to introduce someone to an organ, to use the full capacity of the organ within the parameters of the competition. I felt from a form perspective, I don't use the word formal, I don't mean formal, I mean structural. I felt the song suffered, I keep saying song, I'm in the wrong world these days. The piece suffered a little bit in the second half. I felt there was a fair amount of construction going on in a positive and effective way in the first half, and I suppose I had some subconscious expectation that there'd be a denouement or some kind of clearer resolution and satisfactory conclusion. The piece did conclude, but the threads and the build were not, I think, matched by the latter half. So that for me was the reason it stayed in HC.
I think that's another theme, and I think some advice to give out to composers out there is that you do need to listen to your own piece a few times and maybe take a step back from it as well to hear the structure of your work. It's important that your work has an overall structure that does to sort of guide the listener along, and there can be moments where if you haven't developed a theme enough and move on to something else, maybe your listener is actually left wanting and there should have been a couple more bars, whereas in other sections maybe you want to take something away. So it needs that sort of trimming work done as well to some of these works.
Proportion, I think we found, and you'll see this in the next two comments for the other two place getters, was one of the more important matters that we discussed, and the feeling that the piece exists as a whole and can be digested as one package.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, if you think about when I think simple, I think of like a Mozart, like little movement from a trio or something, and they always have such a beautiful sort of form to them.
There's an inevitability about them.
Yeah.
Of course, it had to rise there and fall there and conclude there, and that's the beauty of simplicity. I suppose that things are clear, and
yeah, clarity is important.
And there had to be. There was no alternative but as they were. And I think the form in some of these was actually the opposite. Was obfuscated and unclear. and certainly not a feeling of inevitability about them. And I think those that we're going to talk about now achieved an effective form.
Indeed.
In different ways.
In different ways. So we now move to our second prize. As I said, these other two works were very fine and were awarded a highly commended, but we didn't think they were worthy of a third prize. With the second prize, we've awarded this to a work called Simple Scherzo, Hommage à Poulenc, which is written by Ben Bloor. Congratulations. This was a work that I was not expecting at first to be awarded a prize the first time I played it. Perhaps because I'm a bit of a serious person myself, and I don't expect...
No, Titus.
I expect works to be a certain kind of gravity to them, but this was a very fun work. It was very pleasing and a musical joke, in essence. As a scherzo, that makes sense. And also, I think Poulenc himself wrote some of these cheeky works. Yeah. So this piece played with time. It played with harmony. It took you on unexpected twists and turns. But within the whole form of the piece, and perhaps because it wasn't too long, it kept you going to the very end. And the joke came to a satisfying conclusion at the end with a big chord. And throughout, I don't think there was a single spot where you would have felt it needed to be particularly trimmed or added to. It was just a complete work.
Yeah. Everything was said for a reason, and I found it. I was smiling from basically bar 3 when the bass came in.
Yep.
And yeah, it was the humorous elements were very clearly expressed in the clues that the composer has given to the performer, not only in the title but also in like marks like grit to slow down and dynamics, and of course the different registers. So it very, very well communicated that we, or you, Titus, as a performer, are to communicate to the audience the humour, and it was received by me in the audience 20 minutes ago as such, and I actually laughed at the end of the song. Peace. And I smiled jovially, generously throughout, and I thought in particular there was a very clever, very witty, it's very, very musical, like in-joke language here, modulation. I can't remember what it was, it may have been by a semitone or something very unexpected, and I likened it when I was speaking to Titus just before to Haydn, who was known as quite a witty composer, especially in his quartets and symphonies, I think. His Farewell Symphony came to mind, some of the displaced beats and the passing of a small motivic fragment between voices, and then maybe the absence of a certain moment when one would expect one, or an alternative interpretation of the same tone in a different key, and suddenly we're in a whole different key area. There was one point where it was bitonal, I think, briefly. I thought it was very clever, very much musicians' music, I would presume. It's hard to hear otherwise as musicians, but yeah, well done.
Yeah, and I think what we were saying before is just that it was a nice take on the competition brief, which was to write a simple piece, but it could be simple and funny, it could be simple and entertaining, and I think that was great. Refreshing and enjoyable. So congratulations, Ben, and you've been awarded second place, which brings us to the final prize. And this one, I think, ticks all the boxes. Oh, just on that previous piece, before I get to the first prize, it was also good because it was simple, like to play as well. It wasn't hard. A beginner could learn it. Which takes us to the last piece. And this piece we awarded first prize because it ticked all the boxes. It had an excellent form. It had a very fine melody. It was playable by an entry-level organist. And ultimately, it just satisfied harmonically as well. So this piece is called Dolcetta. It was composed by Graham Twist, who is familiar to the channel. You may know that Graham Twist is a friend of mine, but that I was unbiased in my adjudication. We did this completely anonymously.
I can verify that for sure.
I can verify that we didn't know who wrote this. But indeed, it was Dolcetta by Graham Twist. So, Ben, what did you have to say about this work?
Yeah, well, it was, the first thing I got was very sweet, which is also a joke because dolcetto means a small sweet thing.
Yep.
But yeah, it was from the outset beguiling and delicious. There was a repeat of the opening phrase, I suppose just for the sake of formal symmetry, which had me a little bit nervous because I thought perhaps the piece won't develop. And lo and behold, within, I think, the fifth bar of the next phrase, we already had maybe it was a applied dominant or something that was different to the first time. And then suddenly we're going in different harmonic directions. And by the third major phrase, we were in a completely different world with some wonderful harmonies. You have a fantastic vocabulary harmonically, Graham, the use of tension and release, a use of very effective use of what people might call cliches. But yeah, you are a masterful wielder of that language, and it was wrought highly effectively, and the form was totally satisfactory, and it really was received with an inevitability, as we discussed, that form should feel, and left us with smiles on our faces.
I think Graham looks quite down on his own work. And I think he does think of his work as a bit cliched or sort of contrived, but the reality is that someone who has worked with tools for long enough knows how to use them, and he really has shown consistently throughout many years that he can write music that is accessible, that doesn't necessarily have to do too much, but does just enough that it satisfies listeners and audiences alike, and that's why people keep playing his music. And that's why I play his music as well in a lot of my performances. So I congratulate him on this latest submission.
And it's melodic. I've still got the melody in my head, but
exactly.
There was a bit of a dearth of melody this year, relatively speaking to previous years, perhaps because of the simple mandate.
And treating a melody with some variation in harmony too can go a very long way.
Huge way.
If you just repeat your same one bar of melody and then do it again in the same key and the same pitch, you don't develop anything. Nothing comes out of that. But what Graham's done here, and you'll hear the piece soon enough, is exactly what we needed. So, congratulations, Graham, and those are the results for the Pep Organ Composition Competition for 2025. Now, I do want to encourage people to keep composing and keep getting experience. The only way to really improve as a composer is to do it more. Enter these competitions is one motivator, but keep in mind that Pep Organ does have an email that you can contact. It's in my channel description, and if you want to send me a piece of music to look at, feel free to do so. That's part of the service that we offer. But we want to make things enjoyable for you, the audience, and we want to make things helpful. We want to help you grow as musicians as well, and audiences as well. We want the audiences to also perceive what they hear in the music, and perhaps also see if they agree with what our adjudication was when they hear the performances. With all that said, we will be back again for another competition. We'll announce that whenever we announce it. Yep, we've got busy lives, and I know Ben does a lot of great things on his own. He's got his own channel and his own band that he plays with, and so I'm very grateful for his time too, for being part of this.
Always a pleasure.
And also, just as a note, these compositions were also adjudicated by Kim off camera, and she came to similar conclusions to what we said, so we had a third adjudicator there as well. With that said, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.